My name is Marjorie Ellison, and I am 70. I used to run numbers for a regional development company, audits, capital calls, the kind of ledgers that keep roofs over families and lights on in office towers. Back then, folks met my eyes and said thank you, without their hands outstretched for more. Now I live alone on a quiet street in Asheville, North Carolina. In the cedar-sided house, my late husband Calvin and I rebuilt one paycheck at a time. We raised exactly one child here, Tyler. He was my compass needle, and I believed I was his true north. That was before the wedding I wasn't told about, before the voicemail, before I heard my only son game-planning my disappearance like a pawn he was eager to shove off the board. It was a Thursday, bright as a polished coin. I stood at the butcher block counter peeling apples for a pie I'd promised Tyler. Granny Smith's with cinnamon and a pinch of nutmeg. Not too sweet. Exactly how Calvin liked his desserts. My phone buzzed on the windowsill beside the flour canister. A voice message from Tyler. Odd. We'd spoken before breakfast about his suit pickup. I swiped play with a thumb dusted white, and then the room hollowed around me. She's still here. I can't stomach that old witch. Once she's out, the $7.8 million is ours. Pack for Paris. No tremor shook my hands. My knees didn't buckle. But something deep inside, a slow-beating engine made from years of quiet giving and practiced forgetting, shut down. I hit replay. Laughter. Two voices. Tyler's and Brianna's, his wife, whispering like teenagers behind a gym bleacher, except the subject wasn't prank calls. It was me, the woman who covered their rent for 3 years, bought the reliable Civic when their clunker died, paid Brianna's rehab co-pays, fronted half their wedding budget, the woman they forgot to put on their guest list, the woman who propped them up through layoffs, debt, and 3 entrepreneurial launches that never left the tarmac. The cinnamon scorched dark in the pan. I didn't rush the flame. I walked to the dining room and lifted Calvin's picture from the sideboard. Him in his frayed fishing hat, eyes crinkled like he'd seen the punchline before anyone else. Tyler had his smile once. Now he sounded like a man I wouldn't open the door for. I sat and pressed my palms to the oak tabletop. This very wood had held birthday cakes, scholarship letters, and my quiet prayers the morning the cardiologist said, aneurysm. The house held its breath while I made the smallest call with the largest consequences. I opened my contacts, found my estate lawyer, and said to her voicemail, please execute the discretionary transfer provision today. I had arranged that clause a decade ago. Neither Tyler nor Brianna knew it existed. My thinking then was simple. If grief ever turned to pressure, I'd still have the agency Calvin trusted me with. I never thought I'd need to use it to protect myself from my own child. I didn't sleep that night. Wind combed the high maple outside my bedroom, the same tree that once rustled Tyler to nap in my arms. The message replayed in loops. I could hear Brianna savoring Paris, like it was a prize for outlasting me. What snagged like a barb under my ribs wasn't even her tone. It was Tyler's ease. I had always believed if betrayal showed up, it would wear a stranger's face. Not my boy's. Not the kid I nursed through fevers, who sobbed when I scraped my knee in the garden because he thought I'd lost some mom. At first light, I boiled water, reached for the porcelain teacup I've used every morning since Calvin left this earth, our 35th anniversary gift, hand-painted, rim-nicked just enough to catch a thumb. I traced the chip and whispered to the empty room, I'm not gone, but you talk like I am. They were treating my existence as a scheduling conflict before duty-free perfumes. While the tea steeped, the trust clause took effect. Calvin's bequest, house, equities, survivor retirement I'd never touched, moved into a tighter structure. No one could tap a scent without my say-so. Their careless audio wasn't just a wound, it was a warning flare I finally decided to honor. There was a time this house rang with laughter instead of the soft hum of appliances. I still see the day Tyler was born, rain hammering the windows like a drumline, me 29 and terrified, clutching the tiny booties I'd crocheted badly. They set him on my chest. I breathed, "Welcome home," and he was. When Calvin died 12 years later on a Tuesday that split the week in two, I did not let grief turn me to stone. I became breakfast maker, carpooler, solo clapper at the band recital. I woke at 4:30 to pack lunches with handwritten notes he pretended not to read in 10th grade. We had lean years. I cleaned medical offices at night and volunteered at the church pantry on Saturdays because volunteers were allowed to take a dented can or two home. Expired cereal never tasted so holy. A month came when Tyler needed $260 for a class trip. I skipped breakfasts and most lunches, convincing myself hot water counted as tea. He never knew. I wanted it that way. Brianna arrived one spring with careful hands and a lemon cake. She was sweet then, calling me Midge, curious about Calvin's old stories and the quilt in the hall. We sipped the good tea I kept in the blue tin, the one I only paired with my mother-in-law's porcelain cup. Brianna traced the flowers on its glaze and said, "It looks like it holds stories." It did. That day, it held lemon and honey, and the first of many afternoons I believed kindness would be enough to knit us together. We weren't cash rich, but we were abundant in care. Soup when they got the flu, Sunday naps with the radio turned off, a light left on. When Tyler lost his first job, he sat blank on the porch swing. I handed him the porcelain cup and said, "Start again tomorrow. Tonight, we rest." He looked steadier afterward. They moved into my guest room, just for a season, to save for an apartment. The lease failed. Then the baby they planned never made it past the first trimester. They stayed. I repaired a sagging step, replanted tulips the neighbor's dog uprooted, covered the heating bill when their checking account threw sparks. "This is what mothers do," I told the mirror. "We anchor so they can sail." And then, little by little, the texture changed. Brianna stopped reaching for the porcelain cup. It gathered dust behind the glass. She dropped Midge and used Marjorie, like she was correcting a clerk. Tyler started scrolling through me. He once kissed my cheek over coffee. Now I strained to remember the last time his voice wasn't threaded with impatience. The night before the message, I set 3 plates out of habit. They texted they'd eaten out and left the table pristine. I sat anyway, sipping from the cup that used to mean something, listening to the clock keep time for all the music we didn't play anymore. The next afternoon, I slid a tin of cookies from the oven, vanilla sugar, lemon crinkles, and the peanut butter kind with a chocolate kiss in the middle, because Brianna said they tasted like her aunt's summers. The whole house smelled like December. My phone rang. I answered smiling, imagining a question about ties or boutonnieres. "Hey, Marjorie," Brianna said in that breezy tone people use when they've already decided you won't get a vote. "Just calling to let you know we got married yesterday." I felt the room tilt. What? "Small, intimate, only our closest circle," she chirped. "We invited special people." The word special sat in the air and turned sour. My eyes drifted to the pale blue dress on the bedroom door that I'd had pressed last week, shoes lined up like good intentions beside it. "I see," I said, because I have learned that sometimes the only dignified sentence is a short one. She kept describing the garden and her sister's song and a pair of white doves they released. She recited details like I was the lady next door who'd waved once, not the woman who raised her husband, not the person who put down the venue deposit and half her gown. Tyler looked handsome?" I offered. "He did," she replied, and I heard him laughing in the background, the carefree kind of laugh you can't fake. I stared at the cookie tin I'd planned to drive over with a baby photo album. There's one picture of Tyler in a toy tuxedo marrying a teddy bear at 5. I thought it would make them grin. Instead, I watched a perfect circle of glass between us. "Anyway," Brianna said, "we'll swing by next week for the decorator's balance." Of course. The ledger was always the thing that connected us. I had wired $40,000 for their dream venue 6 months prior. Brianna had cried on my porch swing when the coordinator-worn dates were disappearing. I cashed out a small CD early. I sold Calvin's coin collection. I did it quietly, the way mothers triage. And I didn't even merit a folding chair near the hydrangeas. "Thanks for everything," she added. "It was perfect." "Congratulations," I said, because I refuse to be uncivilized even to people who profit from my manners. Then I ended the call. The dial tone hummed like a wasp in a jar. I carried my ache to the living room and opened the glass cabinet. I lifted the porcelain teacup. My mother-in-law once told me, "Motherhood means holding your breath and smiling while you do it." I traced the hairline crack and said to the cup, "I'm not special. I'm a bank lobby." The house felt like a seashell the next morning, pretty but hollow. I made tea for 2 out of muscle memory, 2 cups with little violets I found at a Charleston market long ago. Set both on saucers, added spoons. Then I paused. No one was coming. I poured the second cup back into the pot and inverted the empty cup on its plate. One was enough. Because I am messy and human, I opened social media. Brianna's curated glow filled the screen. Lace dress I'd helped tailor. Vineyard I recognized from the invoice. Captioned, "Private, intimate, perfect." Her parents flanked them, navy gown and lifted glass. Pride obvious. I was nowhere in the frame, not even blurred in the background. I had stitched myself into that day with wires and checks and footnotes, and they had scrubbed me out like a stain. Next photo, Brianna's father twirling her on the lawn, while Tyler, off to the side, grinned, with a hand in his pocket. No hesitation, no glance toward an unseen corner where a mother might stand. Just ease. I set the phone down and looked at the grocery list, stuck to the fridge with the strawberry magnet. Eggs, flour, vanilla. I'd baked shortbread for Tyler's childhood weekends. I'd tied a ribbon on the tin. It sat on the counter untouched like a punchline the audience didn't hear. I brushed my lavender dress. It felt like smoothing a memory. Sunlight crossed the table in slanted gold, warming the nicked places. A knowledge rose, not a blow, but a slow sinking. I wasn't family. I was funding. The second teacup taught me the truth. I was extra, leftover, and people don't make seating charts around leftovers. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I pulled a fresh ream of paper and opened a folder labeled T&D, Expenses. For 3 years, I had logged the expenditures I made to keep their lives from unraveling. Receipts printed and slid warm into a stack. I keyed each number into a small calculator until the sum blinked, $284,672. That was the price of my invisibility, and yet I didn't regret every dollar. Mothering translates numbers into needs: a fridge that hums, brakes that don't scream, a panic call at 1:13 a.m. about a mortgage hiccup, and a promise that, "I've got it." I once believed if I could help, I should. Staring at $250,000 plus, a quieter whisper arrived. If they never say thank you and still write you out of the picture, what exactly are you paying for? I turned to a different document, one I hadn't touched in ages. The Ellison Family Trust. The first line, upon the grantor's death, the trust shall vest fully in Marjorie Ellison, including real estate, business interests, and investments totaling $7.8 million. I read it again, and again. The following paragraph. Subsequent distributions rest entirely with the trustee, Ms. Ellison, contingent on active, respectful participation in the family unit. Vague, yes. Binding, also yes. My silence all these years hadn't been weakness. It had been faith that love returns in some familiar shape. But love without respect is just appetite with better marketing. And appetites grow. I closed the folder and called Ruth Delgado, my oldest friend, the only person who has known me both graceful and ragged and stayed anyway. Tea? I asked. She lived in a brick cottage off Sycamore with ivy gripping the corners like an old story you can't retell without tears. We hadn't sat face to face in months. Grief is a poor correspondent. I brought shortbread. She opened the door in fuzzy slippers and said, "Well, look what the wind dragged across my porch. I come bearing butter and sugar." "All is forgiven," she answered, leading me to the bay window where she keeps a small fern alive through sheer stubbornness. I slid my phone across the table. Press play. Ruth listened, jaw set. When Brianna's voice said, "Final nap," Ruth closed her eyes and exhaled. "I thought she loved him," she murmured. "She does," I said, "but she loves an easier version of him, the one that uses other people's goodness like scaffolding." I told her the rest, the stealth wedding, the curated posts, the decorator balance request, the clause I'd triggered before sunrise. I handed over a thick stack of printouts. She flipped through them like trial exhibits, down payment for the bungalow, medical costs for Brianna's mom, the car, the insurance premiums, the backyard wall, line after line, until the total glared back. "You shouldn't have to do arithmetic to earn the right to feel what you feel," she said. "Maybe not," I answered. "But the math keeps me from gaslighting myself. It puts a price tag on a shape that was pretending to be love." Ruth tapped the trust page. "Calvin never liked loose ends. Did you ever finalize successor trustee paperwork after he died?" "It's in my desk. I never filed the update." Her eyes brightened the way they did when we ran mock trials in night school, two women chasing second careers past bedtime. "Then we're in time. You can make the trust irrevocable and appoint me temporary co-trustee. We can pull every asset, house, retirement, brokerage, under the umbrella and lock it down. He doesn't know the clause exists. Good. Surprise is our ally." I held my cup with both hands and pictured air after a long dive. "He'll learn," I said. "Let him," she shrugged. "What's he going to do? Complain that his mother used her legal rights to stop being treated like a self-serve ATM? For the first time in days, I laughed out loud. "Are we vindictive?" "We are prudent," she said. "There's a moral difference." "Do it quietly," I added. "No headlines, no drama." "Stealth is my love language," Ruth said, already tapping a message to a mobile notary. That same morning I booked a locksmith, not because I was scared, but because I needed a clean line between before and after. A young tech arrived at 9 sharp. He dismantled the brass deadbolt Tyler installed years ago, one more item I had paid for, just like the mortgage and the late fees and the other emergencies that always seemed to land on my kitchen table. The old lock dropped into his toolbox with a neat little clink. I felt improbably lighter. I changed every lock, front, back, garage, even the shed where Calvin still smells like cedar shavings. It wasn't about barring them. It was about acknowledging they'd walked out long ago and left their names on keys they no longer deserved. From there, I drove to the bank. The greeter knew me. The bankers always have. "Morning, Miss Ellison. How can we help?" "I need to revise my accounts," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "Remove Tyler Ellison from anything joint. Cancel his authorized access. Change every password and verification method." "Would you like to speak with an officer?" the teller asked. "Yes, Owen Park, if he's free." Owen, in his early 40s, had managed our accounts since Calvin started the company that later sold for the bulk of that $7.8 million. He had a quiet way of respecting your privacy while signaling he saw you clearly. I handed him my folder. He skimmed the POA revocation, credit card removals, automated transfers termination. "You're revoking everything?" he asked gently. "Everything," I said, and the steadiness in my voice startled me. "We can action most items today." He printed forms, flagged signature lines with orange arrows, and watched me sign back the shape of my life into my own hands. When we finished, he paused at the door. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," he said, voice low. "You've carried them a long time, Miss Ellison. Maybe it's time to carry yourself." His words didn't send up fireworks. They opened a window. Sunlight slanted across a floorboard I hadn't noticed in months, and I could breathe. Maybe I wasn't dying. Maybe I'd just gone quiet, like a radio someone turned low and left on a shelf. You only need a steady hand to find the station again. On the way home, I stopped at Lillian's Flowers between the bakery and the dry cleaner. I haven't bought myself flowers since before Calvin left, like beauty required an occasion. I chose orange tulips, not roses or lilies. Tulips look like tiny flames when the light hits them. I put them in a crystal vase from our wedding and set them in the window. The house was still, but it did not feel empty. I brewed fresh tea. 1 cup, mine. No extra saucer signaling a hope that refused to read the room. The knock that afternoon was polite, confident instead of tentative. When I opened the door, Tyler stood with Brianna and a third man in a slate suit, holding a leather briefcase. "Hi, Mom," Tyler said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle in his tie. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside because I was raised to be civilized, and also because I wanted witnesses, chairs and hardwood and tulips, to remember what was about to happen. They sat like they lived here. Brianna assessed the room the way realtors do when they've decided you'll stage better with fewer side tables. The lawyer placed 3 packets on the coffee table: durable power of attorney, medical and financial conservatorship petition, and a temporary access authorization to the trust. "You've seemed a little distracted," Brianna said, her tone syruped with concern. "We're worried." "I'm fine," I replied. "I've been tidying." "That's why we brought Mr. Jeffers," she continued. "Just prudent planning." I looked at Tyler. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You're asking me to hand it all over," I said evenly. "Is that the gist?" "We're not taking anything," Tyler replied, palms up. "We just want to make sure you're okay. You can trust me." There are moments when the ground inside you hardens like cooling glass. This was one. I opened the side drawer and pulled out a small USB drive. "What's that?" Tyler asked. "A memory," I said. "From last week. The voicemail you didn't mean to leave." Brianna's jaw flexed. Color rose in her cheeks. "I haven't pressed play for you yet," I continued, "but I can recite the highlights." "Useless old hag." "Final nap. Paris. I'm open to hearing your context, of course." "It was a joke," Tyler said quickly. "You're taking it wrong." "I didn't comment on it," I said, and Mr. Jeffers cleared his throat like a man who wanted to be anywhere other than between a mother and a son who'd forgotten the word. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, "if this isn't a good time—" "It isn't," I said. "Nor is this the right paperwork, the right tone, or the right people." I slid the signature tabs back across the table. Pages slithered onto the rug like tired leaves. "You can leave now." Tyler stood, mouth half open, calculation flashing behind his eyes. Brianna tugged his sleeve. "Let's go," she hissed. "Oh, and Ty," I added as they reached the doorway. He turned. "Your father's trust isn't what you think it is." "What does that mean?" he said. "It means," I answered, "you should hire a better lawyer." I closed the door gently. Not a slam, just a line. The hallway felt different after. Not bigger, not brighter, just mine. A week of quiet passed. Quiet that tasted like chamomile instead of fear. I reorganized closets and my mind. I thought maybe the worst had already introduced itself and taken a bow. Then I noticed a faint blue blink above the bedroom door frame. Too pale for a smoke detector. I climbed a step stool with a compact mirror and angled it up. A lens. No bigger than a kernel of corn. My breath stopped. I pulled plugs, opened curtains, emptied drawers I hadn't touched since Calvin's last necktie. I slept in the kitchen chair under the brightest light with my old flip phone in hand. At dawn, I called a name I hadn't said in years. Jasper, Calvin's friend who could coax secrets out of electronics the way some men tune fiddles. He arrived with a small toolkit and a soft voice. In under half an hour, he found 3 devices. One in the bedroom, one aimed down the hall at the bathroom, another hiding in the closet trim. He traced the cloud account to an email that included Brianna's maiden name spelled in a way she thinks is clever in passwords. I sat on the couch with my palms flat on my knees to keep from floating away. I had carried Tyler in my body, sold my piano to buy his first car, spoon-fed soups through winter bugs, and now his wife had been watching me undress. Jasper asked if I wanted to file a police report. "Not yet," I said. I needed a plan, not a bonfire. Later, I stepped onto the porch for air. My neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, was pruning roses like she always does when life refuses to be tidy. "You doing okay, Marjorie?" she asked without looking up. I told her enough. Not everything, just enough to name the shape. Surveillance, concern, as a leash, love translated into management. Her shears stilled. "My boy did the same," she said finally. "Said it was in case I fell. He wanted to see if I was meeting my friends who told me not to give him the house. I changed my locks, took down his picture frames. He still mails cards. I don't open them." We stood there, 2 older women with secrets and pruners, listening to the universal sound of a boundary being formed. That night, I opened a dusty attic box and found the wire cross Tyler hammered at 9 in Sunday school. Crooked and earnest, everything love is when it's learning. I cried, not because some version of that boy wasn't real, but because the man who replaced him no longer called me Mom with tenderness. By morning, I had a list with a single word at the top: reclaim. Ruth returned with a leather briefcase and courtroom coffee on her breath. We spread a map of my life across the kitchen table. Bank statements, the voicemail on the USB, the home automation login Jasper helped me secure, my medical records clean as a slate. No decline, no dementia, just grief, which is not a disorder. "They're building a case that you're unfit," Ruth said, tapping the guardianship packet Ty and Brianna had tried to slide past me. "We're going to build a stronger one that you're clear-eyed and done being harvested." While gathering paperwork from Calvin's nightstand, I found an envelope addressed in his hand. If she ever forgets how strong she is. Inside, 1 page in his clean script. "Margie, if you're reading this, you're at the edge. I know the look, stormy and steady. Don't let anyone tell you weakness lives in your spine. If the kids ever turn, remember, you are not their plan. Choose yourself, even if that means walking alone." See, I pressed the note to my chest and felt something old slide back into place. I dialed Ruth. "I'm ready," I said. "File everything." By the time the court summons arrived, black ink declaring my son's formal petition to assume guardianship on the grounds of confusion and paranoia. I didn't crumble. I stepped onto my porch with the letter in my hands and sat under honeyed light until the fear in me quieted enough to make room for resolve. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to erase me before I had a chance to speak for myself. I placed the papers on the kitchen table, opened my planner, and wrote in block letters across next Tuesday. War. Quiet, kind. A week later, Tyler's knock didn't come. Something else did. Courage. And as Ruth assembled filings and I arranged my facts like chessmen with fresh polish, I realized I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to use it. The court date arrived in mid-November. By then, Ruth and I had built a fortress out of paperwork. Statements, receipts, my clean medical report, even witness letters from neighbors. But none of it softened the sting when the official notice landed in my mailbox weeks earlier. Tyler and Brianna petitioned for full guardianship over my medical and financial affairs. Reading those words felt like standing outside my own house, watching someone change the locks from the inside. They weren't just eyeing money. They were erasing me, declaring, in legal ink, that I no longer had the right to sign my own name. I didn't cry. Instead, I made tea in the porcelain cup and sat on the porch steps until the sun draped the yard in amber. I pressed my thumb against the petition's edge, letting the sharpness remind me I was still here, still sharp enough to bleed. The courtroom carried that peculiar chill only government buildings have, sterile and heavy, like it seeps through your bones. I wore my navy suit, the one from Calvin's memorial, hair pinned neatly. My hands stayed folded in my lap, though my pulse felt like it was drumming out of my veins. Brianna went first. She wore pearls I had given her for her 35th birthday. Her voice trembled in the practiced way of someone who'd stood in front of mirrors. "She's paranoid," she told the judge, dabbing her cheek with a tissue. "She isolates, locks us out, won't accept care. We're deeply worried." She tilted her face toward the judge with wide eyes, and for a second I almost believed her myself. Tyler followed, polished in his tailored suit. He invoked apple pies, my shelter volunteering, memories meant to paint a contrast. "But lately," he said, letting his voice crack, "it's like she's someone else, suspicious, cold. Not the mother I know, not the mother I love." He looked directly at me then, his gaze steady, as if he were daring me to flinch. I didn't. My spine was iron. The judge glanced my way. "Mrs. Ellison, would you like to respond now?" Ruth leaned close and whispered, "We can wait." But I shook my head. Silence had been my prison too long. I rose slowly, not because I felt fragile, but because I wanted every step to count. Adjusting my scarf, the one Calvin used to say made me look like Katharine Hepburn, I sat at the witness stand. "I know what they want you to believe," I began, "that I've lost my mind, that grief unmade me. But what I am is awake." I let the words sit. Brianna's fake sobbing stilled. Tyler's jaw tightened. I am the mother who baked extra cookies for an entire baseball team, who sewed name labels into jackets so they wouldn't be lost. Do you know what it feels like when the child you raised calls you a financial burden? The judge's pen froze mid-note. 2 weeks after my husband died, Brianna handed me a brochure for assisted living. Not out of concern, out of convenience. Tyler didn't even read it, just passed me a pen. Last Thanksgiving, I cooked the entire meal myself. Brianna brought a salad and said, "Don't overdo it. You don't bounce back like you used to." When I came down the stairs in my blue dress, my son asked if it was a little much. The courtroom stayed so quiet you could hear the bailiff's watch ticking. I reached into my handbag. Not for the USB yet. That was my ace. Instead, I unfolded a piece of paper. "This is a grocery list I found in their trash, written by Brianna. Number 1, make her feel unsafe alone. Number 2, list fake symptoms, confusion, forgetfulness, insomnia. Number 3, call Dr. Brenner in advance. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I folded it back, placed it beside me. They call me paranoid, but the truth is I just stopped being convenient. I turned toward the judge. I will always love my son, but I am not their asset. I am not their ATM, and I will not apologize for protecting myself. The silence afterward weighed more than any argument they could offer. Ruth and I waited. When the defense tried to paint me as forgetful, when Brianna claimed I imagined hostility, I simply glanced at the judge and pressed the silver USB into Ruth's hand. She cued the file, played it through the courtroom speakers. Tyler's voice filled the room. She's still here. Can't stand that old witch. Once she's gone, the money's ours. Paris, here we come. Brianna's laughter followed, sharp and bright. The gasp this time was sharper. The judge leaned back, lips pursed, expression unreadable. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands and let the truth sit heavy. Days later, the judge delivered the decision. This court finds Mrs. Marjorie Ellison of sound mind and fully capable of managing her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, evidence suggests undue influence and financial manipulation by the petitioners. Effective immediately, all access by Tyler and Brianna Ellison to Mrs. Ellison's property or finances is revoked. Gasps again. Tyler sagged like a man gut-punched. Brianna let out a strangled cry, not grief, but disbelief. She covered her face. He muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." I didn't even glance at them. I stood, bowed my head to the judge, and walked the long aisle, not with triumph, but with clarity. My heels tapped softly, each step an answer. I am mine again. The local news picked it up. First a short segment, elderly woman defends against guardianship by her children. Then it snowballed. Social media framed me as the mother who said no. Comment sections split down the middle. Some called me bitter, others called me brave. I didn't read the comments. Ruth did. She tightened security at my house, checked in daily. "You've rattled something," she said. "Not just them. People who believe mothers should give until the grave." One morning I found a letter shoved under my door. Rot alone. I didn't cry. I made chamomile tea, sat with my tulips, and whispered to myself, "I'm not here to be understood. I'm here to be free." I met with my estate planner. For decades, Tyler had been sole heir. That night, I changed everything. 60% went into a foundation for older women abandoned by their families, the rest to the library, the hospice center, and to Ruth, because once she paid my power bill without telling me. I thought signing would break me. It didn't. Later upstairs, I found the handkerchief I stitched with Tyler's name the week he was born. Tiny ducks along the border. I pressed it to my lips, then folded it neatly into a velvet-lined box. Some things we keep, not because they serve us anymore, but because they remind us that once we loved, once we tried. The next day, I told the lawyer not to send Tyler a copy. "Let him learn through paperwork," I said. "It's how he prefers things." I left the house, moved into a modest coastal apartment with lavender outside and sunlight spilling like honey through sheer curtains. I bought myself tulips weekly. I painted badly on a second-hand easel. I joined a Thursday women's circle where widows and mothers laughed till tears blurred their watercolors. For the first time in decades, I was not Tyler's mom or Calvin's widow. I was simply Marjorie, and it was enough. 2 months later, a handwritten envelope arrived. Mothers in Silence, a nonprofit. They'd followed my case. Would I speak at their fall conference? Theme, inheritance, and a mother's quiet voice. I hesitated, but I remembered what Ruth always said. Silence keeps the shame in place. Stories set it free. So I said yes. I didn't rehearse. I wrote my story by hand, slow and honest. On the day of the conference, I wore navy instead of black. I wasn't mourning. I was arriving. I told the truth about midnight whispers, about lemon pies, about guardianship papers that tried to erase me. I held up the handkerchief with Tyler's name stitched in fading thread, and beneath it my new words in lavender thread, and I chose me. Women wept. Others nodded, finally hearing aloud what they'd lived in silence. Afterward, a woman in her 70s hugged me and said, "My daughter told me I owed her everything. Thank you for reminding me I owe myself something too." That night, in a quiet hotel room, I poured a small glass of wine and wrote in my journal, "They built their lives around my death." I started mine while I still had time. For once, I didn't feel late. I felt right on time. The morning after the conference, the ocean wore a pewter sheen, and the gulls argued like old neighbors. I walked the boardwalk with a paper cup of coffee and a scarf wound high against the wind. Nobody recognized me there, which was a kindness fame rarely offers. I passed a small cafe with wobbly chairs and sun-faded posters for open mics and quilting nights. Inside, the coffee was too bitter, and the napkins felt like yesterday's newspaper, but the window gave me a clean horizon. I opened my journal and wrote the simplest sentence I could manage. I am allowed to live quietly. A woman 2 tables over watched me the way people do when they're trying to solve a puzzle without letting you know they're doing it. Her hair was silver at the temples, her lipstick a hopeful coral. On her 3rd attempt to catch my eye, I lifted my cup. She slid her chair closer. "You're her, aren't you?" she asked, whispering like we were in a church and the pew might judge us. "I'm me," I said, which was all the answer I had to give. She smiled at that, one of those slow, relieved smiles people wear when they've found their car keys after 20 minutes of panic. "My name's Hester," she said. "My son told me I should stay off ladders because this is the year we should talk about plans." I suddenly hate the word plans. "Some words," I said, "only sound generous until you're the one handed them." She laughed, not loudly, but from the place where truth lives. Then she asked if she could sit. We talked about nothing at first. The weather, parking meters, the way seagulls sound like door hinges that need oil. Then she said, "I saw your talk online. The handkerchief. It was the first time I thought maybe I could do something besides apologize for existing." We didn't hug. We didn't exchange numbers. When she left, she touched the edge of my table the way a person touches a doorway they'd like to pass through again. I watched her walk into the wind and thought, if all I did was move one woman an inch toward herself, it was enough. Weeks passed in a beautiful, unglamorous rhythm. I woke with the light and watered the lavender in a cracked terracotta pot I'd rescued from the curb. I painted badly and enjoyed it anyway. Thursdays meant the circle, women with paint under their nails and stories folded into the lines around their eyes. We traded recipes and books and the sort of advice you only share when you've seen how quickly a lifetime can be snatched by someone else's urgency. The library placed a little card under a shelf end cap, Marjorie Ellison Foundation Collection, and stocked it with large print mysteries and memoirs by women who survived more than their share. My hands, which had spent years holding on, relearned how to set things down. The apartment made small sounds at night, the elevator cable sighing, the neighbor's laugh bursting like a cork, the heater waking with a rattle. I was not lonely. Loneliness is the ache of waiting to matter to someone. I had stopped waiting. It wasn't all lavender and oceans. Some days carried the old weight. the memory of Tyler's baby laugh arriving uninvited, the reflex to turn and ask, "Do you need anything?" to a room where nobody expected me to fill a role that was already devouring me. On those days, I walked until my calves complained, and then I walked a block more. A body that moves is a body that belongs to itself. The first letter came in a stack of circulars and charity appeals. No return address, but I recognized the slanted print immediately. Tyler's handwriting had always leaned like a man in a hurry. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it beside the porcelain cup. I let it sit all afternoon while I ironed a shirt that didn't need ironing and filled a bird feeder I didn't own. When I finally opened it, 3 lines blinked up. "Mom, I can explain. We were under a lot of stress, and Bree said you were slipping. You're blowing this out of proportion. Can we talk? To Auntie." I folded it once, then again, and slid it into a drawer with the takeout menus and spare rubber bands. No return address meant he didn't have to accept my silence. A second letter followed. Longer. Performative dusting of remorse sprinkled over a list of reasons. Brianna was scared. Money pressures. I thought you'd want security. You never liked her, not really. We felt shut out. The words did their best to arrange themselves into an apology without ever occupying the central room of one. There was a paragraph about Paris that tried to pretend it had been a joke. There was a postscript that read, "You made me this way. You taught me money solves things." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that sometimes the braver sentence is the one you don't send. Ruth called the next morning. "He left me a voicemail," she said, the edge in her voice filing the niceties off every syllable. "He says you've turned people against him." "I don't have to turn anyone," I said. "He arrived facing the wrong way." She snorted. "I love you, but you're not always comforting." "I'm not trying to be soothing," I said. "I'm trying to be accurate." Then I softened, because Ruth has earned every tenderness I own. "Are you okay?" "I am," she said. I locked my doors and ate cake for breakfast. It felt appropriate. That afternoon, I found a bouquet taped to the apartment's front door, pink roses with edges browned by cold. The card read, "We're family. Family forgives. Call us." I carried the vase inside and set it on the counter with the tulips. The petals tried their best to look like love. The thorns remembered otherwise. Word traveled as it does in small towns and large bodies, quickly and without asking permission. A women's center called about a workshop. A podcast wanted me to say the line that had gone small viral. "I'm not here to be understood. I'm here to be free." I practiced the art of saying no without offering a pile of reasons as a consolation prize. "No, thank you. No, not now. No, I'm tired." People rarely know what to do with a woman whose boundaries don't come with footnotes. That's not my problem. The apartment building's manager, a woman named Ortiz who wore hoop earrings big enough to climb through, knocked on my door with a clipboard and a scowl that turned out to be affection. "Miss Ellison, you good?" she asked. "We got a guy snooping in the lobby this morning, asking what floor you're on, pretending to deliver a package. Said he was family. I told him the package could go straight to the mailroom and family could go straight to hell." "Did he leave a name?" I asked. "Didn't need one. He had the face of a man who thinks women are soft chairs." "He might come back," I said. "My son's persistence is his least charming quality." She leaned against the door frame like a defense attorney who's seen it all. "He can come back. He won't come in." I bought Ortiz a pie from the corner bakery and a gift card for the hardware store. She taped a note by the building intercom that read, "Do not buzz anyone up for 3B without a call from 3B." The day the note went up, I slept through the night without waking every hour to listen for footsteps. Ruth and I drove to the house one afternoon to retrieve the last of my boxes. The locksmith's new deadbolts glinted like fresh decisions. The tulips on the windowsill had gone papery. I pressed a pedal between the pages of a cookbook and let the rest go. I walked through each room without cataloging what had been said there, what had been stolen from between the sentences. I picked up the porcelain cup last, wrapping it in a dish towel like an infant's sweater. I left the good china. Some stories don't belong to us anymore, even if we paid for the ink. A week later, I got a call from Owen at the bank. We had an attempted login using an old credential, he said. It triggered the locks we set. From Ty, I asked. He wouldn't say. That's his job. Mine was to say thank you and hang up and resist the urge to turn a bullet point into a metaphor. Winter leaned its shoulder against the coast. The air sharpened, and the ocean wore a darker dress. I bought a better coat and learned to knit badly enough to keep only myself warm. The Thursday Circle traded watercolors for yarn and tea with a bite in it. We made a joke jar. Every time someone called herself crazy for setting a boundary, she owed the jar $1. We bought ourselves fancy hand cream with the money and laughed like thieves. A letter from the court arrived stamped with a seal that made my stomach jump before my fingers did. It wasn't another petition. It was an official notice that the cameras Jasper removed qualified as criminal violation if I wished to pursue it. I took the form to the window, watched a gull hop sideways along the rail, and imagined what would happen to a man or woman who'd installed cameras in their son's home. The law pretends to be blind. It still sees ages and genders with startling clarity. I didn't want a trial. I wanted my life. Ruth disagreed. They put a lens in your bedroom, she said, pacing my rug, cheeks pink with indignation. They should answer to a judge for that. They already did, I said. He just isn't wearing a robe. She stopped pacing and looked at me like I'd just spoken a riddle. You're not sparing them, she said slowly. You're sparing yourself. Finally, I said, smiling without trying to. You're becoming comforting. In February, the nonprofit mailed a check with a thank you note. I endorsed half of it to the library and half to the women's shelter. Money used to feel like oxygen. Now it felt like water I could share without drowning. The foundation accountant sent quarterly statements in tidy envelopes. The numbers meant less to me than they once had. What mattered was the letter a librarian slipped into the collection box, 3 lines in a careful hand. I used to think my mother hated me because she stopped paying my credit card. I'm starting to think she loves herself enough to let me grow up. I taped that note to the inside of my pantry door, where I keep my salt in a small jar of stubborn faith. On a Sunday thick with fog, I picked up a call from an unknown number without thinking. I heard breathing first, then Tyler's voice, hoarse and startled, as if even he hadn't expected to get through. Mom? The word grabbed me by a hook I thought I'd dislodged. I didn't speak. If I answered, it would be a contract. Silence, I was learning, was a kind of law. He tried again. I got your address from the return on the foundation statement. I wasn't stalking. It was there. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry. I waited because some words owe you more sentences. I know it doesn't fix anything, he continued. I just wanted to say it. Bree. He stopped, swallowed, tried again. She said a lot of things. I let her say them. I used them. That's on me. The furniture held its breath. My hand trembled, and I placed it flat on the table. I don't need money, he said quickly, as if he'd read my thought before I had it. I mean, things are tight, but that's not why I called. What do you need? I asked, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. There was a long silence on his side. I listened to it the way a mother listens to a child's chest for a wheeze. "I don't know," he said finally. "I thought if I said sorry, you'd tell me." "I'm not the map anymore," I said. "If you're lost, you'll have to do the walking." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since he was 12. "I deserve that," he whispered. "Probably more." "I'm not a reducer of sentences, Tyler," I said. "You don't deserve my weapons. You also don't deserve my keys." "What does that mean?" "It means apology and access are not synonyms," I said gently. "I accept the first when it's real. I won't restore the second." He didn't answer. Somewhere a horn sounded on the water. He said, "Bree left," in the same tone a person uses to report the weather after a storm. "She said she didn't sign up to be poor." I closed my eyes. I wanted to wrap him in a blanket, and I wanted to hand him a bill for the blanket, and I wanted to hang up, and I wanted to rewind a decade to a porch where lemon tea meant hope. Wanting is a messy business. "I hope," I said slowly, "that you learn the difference between building a life and borrowing one." He sniffed. "Can I call you again?" "You can," I said. "What you'll get is not a door, it's a line." "I don't understand," he said. "You will," I answered, and then I let the call end while it still felt like a choice. The next day I went to the market for oranges and came home with a bag heavy enough to bruise my hip. I baked a cake because the kitchen needed to smell like something besides resolve. As it cooled, I stitched a few more lavender letters beneath the handkerchief line. Tiny, almost hidden, just enough to remind myself that the choosing isn't a one-time act. It's a verb you conjugate across seasons. I choose. I chose. I will choose. Spring arrived in fits. A day so warm I opened every window. A night so cold I boiled water just to hold the steam. The lavender came back after looking like a graveyard all winter. Tulips showed up in riotous colors that hadn't been printed in any catalog. The women's circle moved to a picnic table behind the library. We painted the same lighthouse from 6 angles and pretended each one was a discovery. Hester from the cafe started coming to the circle. She wore a pin that said, "Not your plan," and brought ginger cookies that made the air smell like holidays and second chances. She told us she'd taken herself off the emergency contact list for a son who treated her like a landline that would always have a dial tone. She gave the new number to a neighbor who had been better kin than blood. We clapped like she'd landed a plane. A reporter I'd avoided since autumn found me at the farmer's market and asked for just one line for the follow-up. I gave him a truth so small it could fit in a thimble. "I'm growing tomatoes," I said. He blinked, then wrote it down like a prophet's code. Ruth came by one evening with legal pads and a strawberry pie. "2 things," she announced, kicking off her flats. "First, I'm helping set up a clinic for elder coercion cases. Pro bono, because my good sense has a weak spot for my better angels. Second, you're hosting a tea for our donors." "This is how you tell me," I laughed. "This is how I tell you," she said, already opening drawers to find the good spoons. "I don't have a dining table big enough for your sense of scale," I said. She looked at my tiny round table and then at me. "You've been performing miracles on smaller surfaces for years." We chose lemon curd and tiny sandwiches and a playlist of women with smoky voices who've been told no by men who thought it would stick. The donors arrived in linen and confidence. We poured tea into thrifted cups and told them stories that made their pens itch. A woman with a senator for a brother scribbled 3 zeros after a number that started too small, then crossed them out and added one more. I watched Ruth's shoulders drop half an inch. The world is terrible, and then sometimes it isn't. That night, alone with the dishes, I broke one of the thrifted cups. Not the porcelain heirloom. The luck of the draw spared that, just a pretty one with violets. I stared at the blue shards and waited for the old reflex to arrive. Look what you've ruined. It didn't come. I swept the pieces into a paper bag, tied it closed, and set it next to the trash with a kind of ceremony. Not everything broken has to be glued. Some things get to be over. Tyler sent a postcard from a city 2 states away. A skyline, a river, a bridge. On the back, in smaller handwriting than he used to practice in 3rd grade, found a job. Not much, but mine. I saw a man in a blue hat today who looked like Dad from the side. I almost cried. Hope that's not weak. T. I didn't write back. I put the card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon and stood there longer than a person should stand in front of an appliance. A letter from Brianna followed a month later. I recognized the perfume before I recognized anything else. Inside were 3 pages of blame dressed as revelation. I didn't finish it. I folded it back along the same creases it had arrived with, slid it into a manila envelope, and mailed it to the return address without a note. I wish I could say I felt noble. What I felt was clean. By early summer, my tomatoes were indecent with fruit. I carried baskets to the women's circle and to the librarian who writes me notes, and to Ortiz, who had a cousin who turned them into salsa and gave me an irresponsible jar in a brown paper bag. The foundation funded a pilot program that taught older women to use 2-factor authentication and recognize concern when it arrives disguised as a login. We laughed through a slide deck that made us feel smart instead of scared. An 82-year-old named Dottie set her phone to require a 6-digit PIN and then raised both fists like she had bench-pressed a Buick. I took the bus downtown sometimes, just to be the sort of person who pays attention to other people's small lives. A man carried a suit on a hanger like it was a promise. A girl in a cheer uniform fell asleep on her mother's shoulder. A tourist said, "y'all," with too many syllables. I kept a small stack of crisp dollar bills to tuck into the guitar case of the man who plays catgut strings until the sky agrees to change color. One morning, a plain envelope waited on my mat with a return address I didn't know. Inside was an invitation on thick paper from a law firm in the city. Calm serif font, embossed seal, a signature like a wave. They were offering a seat on an advisory board for elder justice. Stipend included. I laughed until I cried. For years they tried to take my signature away. Now they wanted to pay for it. I accepted. I bought a better pen. On the first day of the board, the conference room smelled like oranges, and the water glasses were too thin for my taste. I listened more than I spoke. A man with sharp shoes asked if I preferred to be addressed as Ms. Ellison or Marjorie. "Marjorie," I said, "but only if you earn it." He grinned like a person who'd just discovered the floor had been a trampoline the whole time. When I got home, Tyler's voice was on my machine again. He sounded steadier. "I rented a room," he said. "I keep reaching for a life that doesn't belong to me as if I can pick it up by its shoulders and carry it home. I'm trying to stop. I put my name on a bill and my stomach hurt. Then I paid it, and it hurt less." "Good," I said out loud to an empty kitchen. He didn't ask for money. He didn't say Paris. He didn't mention Brianna except to call the marriage a lesson without making me the quiz. I called him back the next afternoon and left a message that said, "I heard your voice. Keep going." It was not an invitation. It was perhaps a blessing. I can do those in small sizes, it turns out, without reopening any vaults. Late that summer, I finally visited Calvin's grave with a basket of tulips. I had put it off because grief is a room I don't like to clean. The cemetery sat on a hill above the river. Someone had trimmed the grass too short. Someone always does. I brushed the stone with the sleeve of my sweater and said, "You were right. The storm came. I did not drown. I didn't ask for a sign. I didn't need one. The wind moved through the trees in a sound that could be mistaken for applause if you're the kind of person who believes in metaphors. I am. On the way home, I stopped at the cafe with the wobbly chairs. Hester sat by the window with a book and a cookie, and a grin that made me feel like we had been meeting here our entire lives and had only just realized it. I ordered coffee and the pie that always tastes like a grandmother's idea of heaven. And when the waitress asked if I needed anything else, I said, "One more sunrise tomorrow." She winked and said, "We're running a special." I went home and opened the journal I keep for the woman I used to be. I wrote her another letter. "Dear me, I know you still cry in the laundry room because the hum of the machine sounds like forgiveness. I know you overdress for errands to remind yourself you are worth looking at kindly. I know you count the teaspoons of sugar like a person who has measured everything their whole life to be believed. Here is what I can tell you now that I couldn't then. Hope is not a miracle. It is a decision you renew in the smallest, least cinematic way. You will paint badly, and it will heal you. You will drink tea alone, and it will not mean you are unloved. You will watch your child walk away from the version of you that made him possible, and you will keep breathing. And one day, you will laugh with a mouthful of crumbs and wonder how you ever thought happiness needed witnesses. I tucked the handkerchief between the pages and pressed the book closed. The apartment's small sounds gathered: a neighbor's radio, the elevator bell, a gull insisting the whole world belonged to him, then remembering the tide had other opinions. I poured a cup of tea, not to fix anything, to bless it. Night fell the way it does, honest and without apology. The lavender held its purple even in the dark. I ran a finger along the porcelain cup's chip and thought about all the women I've met who believe their cracks made them useless. I thought about how light behaves, how it slips into openings and makes a cathedral out of anything willing. The phone stayed silent. I set it face down. The ledger in my head, the one that had counted everything for everyone, closed itself with a satisfying thud. Somewhere a young man named Tyler paid a bill with his own name on it. Somewhere a woman who used to be me decided to keep her keys where they belong. Somewhere a judge chose clarity. Somewhere a neighbor sharpened her shears and cut a thorn from a rose without hurting the bloom. They built their plans around my end. I built a life around my presence. I am not late. I am exactly on time. The ocean kept teaching me how to breathe. Mornings came in silver light. Evenings carried a hush like folded linen. My life was small now, but it was mine. And the smallness did not feel like a cage. It felt like a room with open windows. Tyler called every so often. He didn't beg. He didn't ask for checks. He told me about things so ordinary they almost sounded sacred. How the bus smelled after rain. How his hands ached after a 12-hour shift unloading pallets. How he cooked beans 3 nights in a row and still couldn't make them taste like I used to. I let him speak. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. Love didn't vanish, but it no longer dictated the terms of my survival. One Sunday, he said, "Mom, I rented a little place, not much. The radiator clangs all night, but it's got a window that faces the sunrise." He paused, then added, "I've been sober a month." I closed my eyes and thanked the ceiling, the chair, the chipped teacup on the counter. "That's good, Tyler," I said softly. "Keep going." I didn't tell him I was proud. Not yet. Some words must be earned twice. The women's circle grew. Hester brought friends. Ortiz showed up once with her teenage daughter, who painted a crooked sunflower that looked like defiance itself. We talked less about loss and more about what came after. Someone said, "I thought life was over when my son cut me off. Turns out I was just overdue for my own beginning." We clapped like children at recess. The foundation expanded quietly. We funded lock replacements for women still living in houses where respect had expired. We paid for laptops so grandmothers could email without relying on suspicious helpers. We even covered legal fees for one woman whose daughter tried the same guardianship trick. She won. She sent me a card with daisies pressed flat inside. You gave me my name back. On a soft spring evening, Ruth and I sat on my balcony with wine and strawberries. You know, she said, for someone they called confused, you've turned into the clearest woman I know. I laughed. Clarity doesn't come free. I paid $250,000 for mine. You didn't lose it, she said. You invested it in your own freedom. We toasted that, glasses clinking like bells at a wedding I would have rather attended than financed. And yet, if exile was the price of freedom, I had already paid it in full. Later that night, I unwrapped the porcelain cup. Its chip gleamed in the lamplight. I poured tea, steady hands, 1 cup only. I lifted it and whispered, I chose me. The room stayed still, but something inside me finally moved. Not forward, not backward, just enough to remind me I was alive. For decades, my worth had been measured in what I gave away. Now it was measured in what I refused to surrender. My son might one day understand. He might not. Either way, I had rewritten the ending. Not silence, not erasure, but presence. They built their lives around the day I'd be gone. I built mine around the fact that I am still here. And sometimes, the loudest revenge is to outlive the story they wrote for you.